Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our last day of the Annapolis Book Festival. We saved the best for last to talk with Sara Harberson today. I'm Laura Burrell-Baxter, the Director of College Advising at the Key School, and I'm really excited to talk to Sara today, given our similar pathways in history and my small obsession with the college admission process. The Annapolis Book Festival has been going on for about 18 years, and it is our first time doing it online. And we're happy that we have such a wide array of people attending today from such a broader geographic area rather than just right here in Annapolis. We're going to spend the next hour together with Sara, and I'm excited to ask her a bunch of questions about her history working in college admission on both sides of the desk, as well as her new book. We'd also like to hear from you, so please use the Q&A and add your question under Ask a Question. You can also buy Sara's book with the Buy a Book button that you see on your screen. And you probably see the poll. You can pull it up if you don't have it right in front of you, but we would love to know a little bit about who our audience is. In fact, Sara and I talked prior to today about how this book can be used by a wide array of people, obviously by high school students going through the process of college admission, by those of us who are counseling students, by the college admission side, and certainly parents who are encouraging, poking, and prodding their students through this process. So I'm very excited to have Sara today with us and to talk more about her book, SOUNDBITE. We're going to start, Sara, just by having you share a little bit about your background on both sides of that desk. So working both in college admission and helping students through the process of applications, the counseling side on the high school side, and then now as part of Application Nation and as an author. So welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you for having me. This is such a special event, and I feel really honored to be here. But, I got started in the college admissions process a long time ago. I've served every role from an entry-level admissions officer at the University of Pennsylvania to an associate dean of admissions at Penn, where I was second in command. I became a dean of admissions and financial aid at Franklin and Marshall College. But then I switched to the other side of the desk and became a director of college counseling, very similar to Laura, your role right now at the Key School, and ultimately left to create Application Nation and be able to spread the word about college counseling. In many ways, I left the college side of this process because I felt like it was so one-sided, that the colleges controlled everything and that students' voices and their stories weren't necessarily coming through. And so as a college counselor, it's such a privilege to work with high school students where you can help them and really empower them to see that they can dictate their outcomes and their destiny. So it's been a long time coming, but I've been in the field for really my entire adult life, besides a year in law school and a year at a job at a law firm. I've been working in college admissions on either side of the desk.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that certainly we have in common in talking with high school students and their parents is just equity and access to college admission. And so when you think about this book and the critical need of being able to serve all students, whether you're at a private school, a public school, a homeschooled student, and certainly all of our students, especially this past year during the pandemic, being on their own, living on Zoom, how does your title of America's College Counselor just reach all types of students?
Yeah, it was so important to make sure that I had such great experience and knowledge working on the college side and also working on the high school side. But it all comes back to where you grew up and how you were raised and what this process was like. For me, I had no college counselor. I didn't even know that that role existed in the workforce. But I was so lost and had to learn everything on my own. I went to a really large public high school in Southern New Jersey where most students didn't go to college. So I was truly on my own. But when I started out on that journey of applying to college, I realized I loved it. And so at the heart of what I do every single day is to make sure that I'm not just catering to a handful of families. I could just have private clients and be, fine and comfortable. But to me, it's about getting the knowledge out, making sure that families from all walks of life have information, easy access. It's my belief that college counseling shouldn't be a privilege. It should be something that every family in the country can have access to. So I have free guides on my website, saraharberson.com, from, how to fill out an application to the junior guide to how to pick the right essay topic. I've got a weekly blog. I rarely miss a week with my blog. So you can imagine every possible topic related to college admissions. I've written probably multiple blogs about it, depending on the time of year. And then I do, which I love, Instagram Lives every Friday afternoon. So anyone who follows me on Instagram can watch me and ask questions. I do Facebook Lives every single month. And then several years ago, I started Application Nation, which is a private Facebook group, and it's subscription based, but it is affordable for all families. So when students and parents have questions literally 24/7, wherever they live, they can ask me questions on the discussion board and I answer them, but everybody learns that way. I think that's the myth about college counseling and college admissions. I think at one point, family had the money to afford a college counselor or understand the process from the inside out. They held on to that knowledge. They didn't necessarily want to share it. But what I built in Application Nation is a community of parents and students who are supporting each other. But I also give regular Zoom calls to them. I edit their sound bites. I review their college lists. I review their essay topics before they even start writing. I try to take them every step of the process, and I'm right there by their side, at least virtually.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder that, for the parents on this call, that the college process has changed and evolved tremendously since we all went to college. So certainly trying to think about what your child needs if they're going through this process and you're trying to help and coach and encourage them, that it is completely different than it was 25 or 30 more years ago. And Sarah and I have certainly see that again from both sides. When you sat out and started to write SOUNDBITE, Sarah, how did you think about the audience? Who was the target audience, and who can benefit most from SOUNDBITE?
Obviously, high school students are the main audience, but parents tend to pick up the book first. They're the supporters of the book, and then they read it and go, "Oh my gosh, this is so cool!" And then they pass it along to their children. And that's the same thing in Application Nation. It's funny, when we open the group, it's all parents on the Zoom calls, or all parents asking the questions. And then once the student realizes they can trust me, all of a sudden they're the ones showing up. So it's really cool. I see that in Application Nation, and I've seen it with the book. So the target audience are high school students and their parents, college counselors. In fact, my old high school, there's a great counselor there now. I wish I had her back in the day. And she's read the book as well and is encouraging her staff to read the book. And then, it's interesting. One of the added benefits of SOUNDBITE, and this was my goal, I just was hoping and praying it would come across in the book, and I think it has, that the whole SOUNDBITE concept is not just for high school students. It introduces the concept to high school students, and it can absolutely help them through the college admissions process. But just as we evolve and grow as individuals and mature, our SOUNDBITE evolves as well. So all the parents who are, or adults that are reading the book, are realizing, hey, what's my SOUNDBITE? And is it now a very different SOUNDBITE than 5, 10, 20 years ago? So it really forces all of us to make sure that we are living our very best life, and we're making an impact not only on ourselves, but the world around us. And again, that's my message. I'm not just going to help one family. I want the message to get across far and wide. And so I feel like I'm living my SOUNDBITE every day. I feel very fulfilled professionally and personally as America's college counselor. But I know I'm making such a positive impact on so many students and parents out there.
Yeah, and in the volume today, for those on the call who are listening to the news, this has been record numbers, right, of college applications in the country. And thankfully, because during the pandemic, when students couldn't test and take SAT and ACT exams, it did free up in a different way for our college admission partners to say, we really do need to focus on looking at students holistically, and really looking at everything that they put in that application. So I feel like the timing of Soundbite, probably when you started writing it, we didn't even know the word, COVID. And so it's
Yeah.
interesting timing that it's come out. And I think it was released on April 6th, if I got that right. So in just a few weeks' time, tell us a little bit about, well, really why the timing was right to write Soundbite, and really just how it's been received so far.
Yeah. So I started to plan out the concept when I became a director of college counseling at this private high school that I worked at. I was working with really wonderful students, but they didn't see it in themselves. They were still kind of following what everybody around them was doing. And so this was my approach to how to get these really special students to recognize how extraordinary they were. And they didn't come from privileged or pedigree backgrounds. They just were incredible, but they didn't realize it and they didn't know how to project that. Instead, they just kept following everybody else around them, the older students or popular students. And so I started mapping out Soundbite then and started putting it to work. I never told them what I was doing, but it was my method and my approach to see if it was working. And then after I left the high school and started Application Nation, I did write a book proposal for Soundbite. And I attempted to get a literary agent. It didn't work. I was trying to get, a publisher, but you really, I didn't know you really do need a literary agent these days to get a publisher. And then this admission scandal broke, Laura, as we know, back in the spring of 2019. And I appeared on a number of national shows, including CBS This Morning. And my literary agent saw me on CBS This Morning and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I said, "Funny you should ask. I've got a proposal." And ended up getting a book deal within weeks after that. So, and the reception at this point is, again, I feel like I've been waiting for this for so long. It's been in the works for so long. I wanted the release to be in the spring. I didn't want to wait to the fall because my editor wanted it to be the fall, thinking that's when things get started. But the spring is when, you know, as we know, as college counselors, we start working with those high school juniors, especially. So
Mhm.
it worked out perfectly that the launch was in April. And the reception has been, my gosh, I need to write my soundbite, especially from the adults. And then now they're all passing it on to their kids. So I feel like the book is going to get a lot of traffic, so to speak, not just one person in the family. I'm getting the sense that both parents are reading it and their child is reading it as well. So I've been really, really thankful to hear that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I have it right in front of me, and it's only a couple weeks old, and it looks like it's been around for a long time. I've been carrying it back and forth to work, and honestly, for I know that I have families from my school on this call, plus others in our area. But it really is the kind of book that you're gonna, earmark this page and circle this and underline that, really because it is a guide, right? Like I've looked at it as certainly good sound advice about a sound bite, but it's really just such a great guide to think about what's coming. And as you said, while it's geared towards high school students, if you are a parent who will sometimes come in and talk to me about, I'll talk to their child about their career path and some of their interests, and the parents like, well, now I think I might be thinking about that change. That really your sound bite doesn't end, right, with the college admission process. So I'd like to read a quote from your book that's actually in the introduction. And as soon as I saw it, I did highlight and circle it. And frankly, I feel like I should probably hang it here. I'm actually in my office at school, and I should probably put it above the door. I think maybe every parent on this call of a junior, or maybe even if you're the parent of a ninth or a 10th grader like Sarah and I are, that you might want to print this out and stick it somewhere that everybody in your family will see it. And then I just like you to kind of respond to it, Sarah, after this. But it's in your introduction, and it says, students can get an incredible education at almost any college in the country. It is never about where you go. It is about what you do with the opportunity. So I would like to read that 20 times as a reminder, but
Yeah.
could you just talk about how important that is in your work with students and especially with their parents?
Yeah, and think because the admission scandal happened, there are so many families thinking that they have to be really wealthy, they have to have connections, they have to pay a college or someone that they don't trust money to get their child into college. But I am living proof that you can come from really humble beginnings, and you should never underestimate your own ability to make things happen. I think about, not knowing anything about how to apply to college, but you know what? I'm sure I made some plenty of mistakes, but I ended up going to college, and you actually just need one college to accept you. And I remember getting there and thinking, oh, I'm gonna drown. I'm never gonna survive. I came from, a public high school where students don't even go to college. They drop out before you graduate. How am I gonna survive? Well, you know what? If you want something, you will make things happen. And so I went to Hamilton College. It's in the book. It's all over the book. It has formed who I am and how I look at education. And everything that I've gotten myself, and I try to get that across to students. And sure, I would have loved to have gotten a book deal sooner. Sure, I would have loved to have started my company a lot sooner. But you know what? Here I am, and I'm living my soundbite. I'm living my dreams. So I'm a big believer in you don't need connections, you don't need money, you don't need a pedigree. You just need yourself, and you need to be willing to hustle. You need to be willing to pivot as well. When things aren't working out or you're not happy in a job, or even at the college that you end up at, it's not the end of the world. It's about, being aware of it and actually doing something to change your circumstances. And that, again, that's when your soundbite keeps evolving, because your interests, your understanding of yourself is going to change again and again over time.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's such a good reminder, whether it's a parent or student who might be listening to us, that there is more than one college out there for you, and you get to make that experience, your own. And you can take any college and make it a terrific college by, what you put into that. And I just think that's such a good reminder as people, read your book and use that to kind of help their child or a neighbor or a friend kind of through this process. Um, so we're going to get into kind of some of the nitty gritty of soundbite, and I thought maybe I just have you read your soundbite. I think it's
Yeah,
just such a good basis for not just obviously the context of the book, but our conversation today. Because if we had time, I'd almost like to do a breakout session and say everybody write their
yeah,
soundbite, bring it back. And we obviously can't do that in this setup, but I do wish that we could kind of assign that as homework to everybody. But could you share yours so that we could hear a
sure.
bit about how you got to that?
Yeah, and we do workshop sound bites in Application Nation. It's a whole lot of fun, but you need
Mhm.
time to do that, and time to reflect too. But so the sound bite in my book is I am America's college counselor, providing high quality college admissions advice to all families through monthly Facebook Lives, a weekly blog, and up to the hour responses to the thousands of members of the online community I built, Application Nation. So that's my long version. But I often say the more aware you are, the more you live your soundbite, it actually can get even more concise. So my quick and dirty soundbite right now is I am America's college counselor and the author of Soundbite.
Yes, it's extended a little bit, right? So for families who are listening, or for students who are trying to kind of just figure out how this process is going to unfold, could you talk a bit, especially from your college admission side of things, and then obviously when you were a college advisor and counselor at a high school, tell us a little bit about how long a typical application is actually read and reviewed. Obviously, there's now, and I just shared with some of my juniors, there's lots of different ways that applications are reviewed. Some are done in committee, some are done individually. Some are done now with this driver partner mode, this kind of committee-based evaluation. But talk a little bit about, how long a student will be read, by their first reader, and put that into the context of why, soundbite can actually help them figure out how to be noticed when they're read.
Sure. So when I started at Penn in the undergraduate admissions office back in the late 1990s, I had really I was supposed to read an application in about 20 minutes, but I would always take longer because I didn't want to miss anything. So sometimes it would take me 30 minutes to read an application. And I felt so rushed going through every single section of the application. Well,
Mhm.
fast forward to today, and colleges like the University of Pennsylvania and many others are reading a college application usually in about 4 or 5 minutes. So I often say your 4 years of high school can be reduced to a 4-minute evaluation. And
Mhm.
if your identity, if your soundbite isn't clear throughout your application, or your soundbite doesn't match up the colleges that you apply to, it's going to be an even faster read on your application, because the admissions officer can tell pretty quickly that you may not be the right fit because of objective or some subjective information.
Mhm.
So I tell families you have to understand how quickly this process goes, that just as any individual in our society, admissions officers make snap judgments about the student on the receiving end, the student behind that application. And the way I was trained at Penn, and I trained a staff at Penn, and I did the same thing at Franklin and Marshall, and this happens all over the country in every admissions office, is admissions officers are trained to read the application and recommend an admissions decision. Are they going to recommend an acceptance, a wait list, a deny? But you can't just say, hey, I want to accept Olivia Jade to the University of Southern California, right? You've got to have a reason to back it up. I call that reason the admissions officer soundbite on the student. And it's a quick sentence.
Mhm.
And that can be used as evidence that the admissions officer read your application. That can help them show a reason for why they're recommending an acceptance or a wait list or deny. That can help the dean of admissions or the director of admissions or the president of the college when they're looking at the application. They can go straight to that one sentence soundbite written by the admissions officer. So here's the thing, everyone, that soundbite is going to be written about the student regardless of whether or not the student has a really clear understanding about themselves. And
Mhm.
so when I'm working with students, they often will say, I don't want to be misunderstood. And I say, you're right. That is probably the biggest issue in college admissions, that an admissions officer is going through the application so quickly that they don't recognize what makes you special. So you have to have a really good sense of it in your mind and your heart and really lead with it so that it comes across in every part of your application. So this is the first time, Laura, that something that happens in every admissions office across the country. They don't call it a soundbite, but it's a one sentence reason for why they're recommending a student. This is
Mhm.
the first time that someone has actually put it out there. Hey, listen, this is what's happening. So instead of just sitting back and praying, hey, I hope they understand me, I hope my story gets across, I say, no, 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 students, you've got to take ownership of this. You've got to have a soundbite, a powerful, distinctive soundbite that no one else in the world is going to have.
Mhm.
Because admissions officers, and we know this from being former admissions officers and colleges, they are more intrigued and want those students that they don't have on their college campus.
Mhm.
So if you recognize what makes you special, and everybody has it, no matter what your background is, we all have something really special. If you can identify that and actually project that out, doors are going to fly open,
Mhm.
not just in the college admissions process, but when you are interviewing for a job interview or an internship or applying to law school or trying to get a book deal out of nowhere or trying to get investors for your company. You've got to know what your soundbite is. It's kind of the modern day elevator pitch for students and really for adults in every chapter of their life.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good thing to think about in the context of, I always say to students and to families that, you don't know what the college admissions office priorities are for for that year. There are institutional priorities, and many of you on this call, if you're going through this college process with your child or you have just done that recently, those institutional priorities are things that change and pivot and evolve over time. And I always say to my students, don't worry about trying to figure out what those things are. Your job really is to figure out how you want a college admission office to know your story. And we call it now a soundbite from you. But I think it's really important for students and for really even for parents, when you're driving your child somewhere or you have that little bit of time with them alone, to encourage them to just be who they are and not check the boxes, right? Of they must want to see me do this for 4 years or this many different kinds of activities that admission officers see through that facade, right? If you're just really trying to check the box, that's not the authentic student that they're looking for. So when you think about working with the students, I guess that you're working with now, certainly in Application Nation, and even kind of going back to your college counseling days at the high school level, and you wrote this in the book that the student's not going to, it's not apparent, it's not explicit. The soundbite isn't like, here's my soundbite, but it's there, and the admission officer gleans that when they read. So how would you recommend to me, counseling students or to parents or students on this call, how do you start to kind of build that and shape that soundbite?
Yeah. So in the book, I talk about 3 tenets that students really have to get started. They've got to be self-aware about their strengths and limitations. They have to be intentional about what they do with their time, both academically speaking and their free time. And they need to be good storytellers. And sometimes a student will say, I'm really reserved, I'm shy, I'm introverted. It doesn't matter. Your story can come through in ways you never expected. So just to give you an example, and I'm sure you're doing this, Laura, with your own students at the Key School, spring of junior year is usually when we recommend as college counselors to reach out to teachers who are going to write your letters of recommendation. Well, if you have a clear soundbite in mind about who you are, you can share that with the teachers that you are asking for a letter of recommendation. It doesn't have to be, verbatim the way that you say it, but you want to be able to express that so that they understand your point of view, your identity, your perspective. And I tell students you can do that in the conversation you have with your teacher, but then follow it up in writing. I want to thank you so much for agreeing to write my letter of recommendation. I just, you have shaped, who I am, and I really enjoyed the class that I had with you. And you can weave in your soundbite into that email and actually put it in writing. So that's a very obvious way to tell your story. But it also comes down to the topics you choose to write about. We know that many students are going to have to write a main college essay, but they're probably going to have to write other essays for these college supplements. So if their soundbite has something academic in it, they can actually pick that piece out and reference it for why are you interested in this major that you've listed on your application. But storytelling can come through in every section of the application. I also have 5 rules, and some of them are tougher to do than others. But those 5 rules will ensure that it is a genuine statement that the student has about themselves. It's really concise. No one else has it. And so the 5 rules really quickly are going to be, it has to be written in first person. So as parents, we can help. We can write a first draft for our child, but ultimately it's got to be their words. It has to start with I, usually. So it has to be written in first person, number 1. It also has to be concise. Nowadays, the attention span, even in a conversation, even when you're meeting someone new, even on social media, we know that the person on the receiving end is going to move quickly through their world and their day. And so if you don't catch their attention right from the start, they have already moved on. So I tell students it's got to be a concise 1-sentence statement, just as if you were an admissions officer writing a soundbite about your application. It's got to be quick. Why are you special? And you've got to do it in about 40 words or less, which is really, really hard. The 3rd rule is it has to be written in the present tense. We all find ourselves thinking about, what we accomplished or what we did in the past, like, oh, I was a dean of admissions. Well, that was super cool back in 2011. But it's been 10 years since I've been a dean of admissions. So I say, live in the present, but also don't get so focused on the future that you are missing out on opportunities happening all around you. So I could say something like, as part of my soundbite, like, I want to have my own talk show about college admissions. That's super cool, but that's not what I'm doing right now. And sure, maybe I want to get there, but what can I do right now and be and do? So present tense is really important. The fourth rule is even harder to do is I tell students not to use any adjectives or adverbs unless it's a proper noun or unless it's used as a part of a proper noun. So nouns and verbs are what I tell students to use to describe themselves, which is a big challenge because we want to add hardworking and ambitious and responsible. But Laura, as we used to read letters of recommendation by teachers and counselors who used adjectives all the time, you could swap them for every single student, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm,
nouns and verbs are activators, whereas adjectives and adverbs are just modifiers. They can't stand on they can't stand by themselves. And then the final rule is it's got to be a statement that nobody else in the world can have.
mhm,
And that's the difference between joining clubs, following the crowd, or being a pioneer. And frankly, I want to be a pioneer. I want to raise kids that are pioneers. I want to work with students who are going to be pioneers so that they are doing something that changes their life and changes the world in
mhm,
a really positive way. And that's what we get when we, support and raise pioneers instead of followers.
mhm. You talked a lot. So in addition to storytelling and kind of getting these things, down in that right, concise 40 or so words, you also talked a lot about just self-awareness for students. And that's something that, I'm constantly talking to my students and sometimes even their parents about the fact that yes, your future is coming, but right now you need to focus on who you are, right? Who are you becoming? What are you doing right now in high school that's helping you get to that spot on the wall? So how do you maybe help students figure out that component and not be, to keep that eye on the prize, but to really live in this moment now and start asking yourself, who are you and what do you want to be, right? Not what you want to be for a job, but who do you want to be as a person? Like, how do you get that self-awareness to be kind of embraced by that 15, 16, 17-year-old?
Yeah. There's a chapter in my book about self awareness, and there's an exercise at the end of that chapter. It's called Know Thyself exercise.
Mhm.
And the root of that is that Hamilton College, my alma mater, their alma mater, the motto of Hamilton is Know Thyself. And so that whole chapter is getting students to recognize not what they have been doing because that's what is expected because their parents have encouraged them to play a certain sport or all of their friends are doing it. We've all been in that situation. But I want students to think about something that they do. It could be academic in nature, it could be extracurricular, it could be a personal skill that you have. Even if you have just a little bit of exposure or experience and you felt really good doing it, that could be a strength. And being self aware to recognize that is huge. I will say that parents tend to recognize things in their kids well before their child has ever, is ever recognizing it. So I'll give you an example. I think of myself. I played tennis and I was good, but I wasn't great. I was a really good student, but I didn't know how to write a college essay, in high school. I don't know how I survived English, but I'll tell you, freshman year of college was a real wake up call for me because we just didn't learn how to write where I went to school. But the one thing I knew I was really, well, the one thing I just felt so alive doing was public speaking. And I recognized that back in ninth grade, even sooner than that. It's like we sometimes we know what we're really, really good at. But when you're in high school, you think, well, public speaking, it might be like an elective class, but I can't really does that really matter? It's funny, sometimes the elective classes we take in high school, some of the hobbies that we do on our own when like nobody else knows that we do them, those can be strengths of ours that we can actually turn into a profession. It can turn into a job. It can turn into a really powerful soundbite. So the know thyself exercise is a way to start being able to parse out some of the things that we do in our everyday life that maybe not even other people know what we do and what we're really good at. Because it's tough. You can try to do what all your friends and peers and classmates are doing, but think about it. You've got to compete with the best of the best. If
Mhm.
you do something that nobody else around you is doing, there's no expectations. There's like a wide open path for you to kind of do whatever you want. And I'd rather go that direction, actually.
Yeah, and I love your self-awareness of knowing that in high school that you were good and strong in the arena of public speaking, but you definitely weren't thinking about college admissions or being a college counselor because like when you said you went to law school for a year, like those are the kind of target jobs that parents are always encouraging their kids to think about,
Oh,
right? Like you can be
yes.
a lawyer or a doctor or a nurse or a teacher, but nobody ever says, "Oh, you should be a college counselor someday."
No,
But I
no.
do think that self-awareness is such an important piece for our students, especially because there are so many different opportunities out there that in high school you don't even know are available yet, right? And I even think that about course choice in college, that in high school you have a finite number of courses that you're going to take and you have to complete your requirements. And you're so focused on taking the right thing and getting the right grades. And you get to college and all of a sudden it's enjoyable, right? To kind of pick all these different things that you might be interested in. When you think about giving advice to parents, because I think we have more parents on the call than anybody else, what advice do you give them on how to best support their student, their high school student, in their quest to find the right college? What are some nuggets of advice you'd give to parents?
So, as I mentioned a moment ago, Laura, a lot of times parents see something really special in their kids well before their child sees it. So, see those hidden talents and support them and celebrate them. Hopefully, we'll have some time for a couple of new sound bites that I can share with the group. And, I think about one of the students. He's a student who goes to a high school where everybody kind of looks and acts the same, and he is so different than everybody around him, and he was made fun of, and he was doubted, and he was bullied. But look at him now is basically what I want to share to families, that when we see our kids doing something creative, especially, I highly encourage it, because the job market and professions, it's so different than, Laura, when you and I were in high school. My parents they expected me to, you were either going to be a lawyer or a doctor, and I didn't like science, so I went to law school because that was expected of me. There aren't as it's jobs aren't just 9 to 5 jobs. There aren't just traditional jobs out there. And so when we encourage our kids to explore things beyond just what is expected, a whole world opens up, because you're right. I didn't even know what an admissions officer was or a college counselor was back in ninth grade, but I did enjoy public speaking. I also, interestingly, and I bet you were the same way, I was always very curious about people's backgrounds. So anyone I met, or even I would be at the airport watching people interact, I was so curious, where were they going? What was their story? And so if you can recognize it, there's a reason why I still love reading applications. And when I have an application nation student, I can really look over almost every piece of their application before they submit it. And it's this beautiful story about their life and their background coming through, and that never gets old. So that's one of my strengths too, that I just love. I'm so curious about where you come from and how you have become the person you are. So
Mhm.
yes, recognizing our kids' strengths is a big thing. And even if it doesn't fall into kind of a traditional thing, to me, that's the most exciting thing to do. So, my daughter's, sometimes she'll say, I have a very good friend who is a corporate attorney, incredible, incredible woman. And so my daughter will say, I want to be just like Mrs. Ackerman. Or I want to be just like Mrs. Ackerman too. But I also want you to realize, look at how you write. Your writing is so far ahead of your age. And so it's taken her a little while to get used to that talent, that strength that she has. And now she's finally exploring it, which is great, because she's in ninth grade, and you should be exploring things in ninth grade. You don't have to commit to a life or a career when you're in high school. Things can change, you change, and your soundbite changes with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I teach a ninth grade class, and I think that's such a good reminder for parents on this call that in ninth grade, I don't really even use the word college advising. I just say, what are you wanting to explore, right? What are you curious about? What are the classes you might want to take? What are the clubs you might want to do? What are the books you might want to read? What's the music you might want to listen to? And all of that kind of then like sets that path going, right? But to explore kind of thinking, I always say to ninth graders, like, think of what you wanted to be. Like, what did you dress up for Halloween when you were 5? Or in kindergarten, what did you think you wanted to be? The firefighter or the nurse or the ballerina? And now what are you curious about, right? There are just so many different disciplines you can think about and study and approach, and to not get so pigeonholed. So I think that's important for our parents to really, pull that out of their student and really encourage that, like you said, because they see those gifts in their children long before even sometimes teachers do or the student does. I think that is important. I would love for you to read a couple of sound bites that worked, as you said in the book. I read a bunch of them, even from my own college, where I both went to school and worked in the admissions office, just to see if I was like, well, yeah, I'd take that student at Dickinson.
Yeah.
And it's funny that Sarah and I both worked at very similar liberal arts colleges and attended very similar kinds of liberal arts colleges. So there's so many parallels there. And it's been fun for me to read those sound bites and really see why this school, would be attracted to this student, because there's so many different kinds of colleges too, right? There are 3,500 and some schools that you're going to find more than one for yourself, but one school might be looking more for that, that art mind or that research mind or that liberal arts kind of questioning mind. And so that soundbite will really work, especially when you think of the kind of school that you're going to attend. So if you want to pick a couple and read to us, that would be great.
Yeah, I tried to pick ones that aren't in the book because I know some of our audience members have read the book. So I'll read you a few from this year. The first one is that young man I was talking about. I did a mock interview with him just to kind of get him talking. I find that I can get a great soundbite from a student if I do a mock interview. I can also identify essay topics for their main college essay around June, right after junior year end. So about a year ago, I did a mock interview with this student, and we came up with this soundbite. So I'll read it to you. I am a linguist, dictionary editor, and activist for endangered indigenous languages and cultures, a Native American reenactor, an experimental musician, and jazz cat, broadening the perspective of my rural community to spread cultural understanding. So here's a young man who lives in a rural part of New York State, several Native American communities. He identifies as a white male, but very interested in Native American languages and culture. He actually was the editor of a dictionary for one of the Native languages to make sure that we don't lose it. So he was a different kind of student at his high school. He sometimes felt like no one else was like him. And then I met him online right in the middle of the pandemic last year. And I went, oh my, do you realize how special you are? He's like, I just come from a regular background. Like, look at my house. I live on a farm basically. And I said, you've got an incredible soundbite. So he applied to more colleges than I wanted him to, Laura, of course, this year. But he got into Stanford, Yale, Brown, and I think 10 other colleges, but those top three are his top three choices right now. It's still up in the air about where he will end up. And then I have another soundbite from a young woman. It's interesting. We do have a lot of student athletes that we work with, I'm sure. And a lot of times they define themselves as a student athlete. And I would say it's okay to do that to get started, but there's so many student athletes. She is a volleyball player. Well, there are thousands of volleyball players in the country right now. And if everybody self-identifies as a volleyball player, then they don't necessarily stand out as much. So it's interesting. During the mock interview, I said, what is the position on the volleyball team? I never played volleyball, so I wasn't necessarily familiar with the positions, but she said she is the middle blocker. And then as we started talking, I realized how much significance that position had, not only on the volleyball court, I guess court, yeah. Um, but outside of volleyball, that she was this middle blocker. So I'll read you her soundbite that we came up with. I am the middle blocker on my volleyball team and in life, defending and advocating for those around me and strengthening self-worth and mental health awareness as a peer and elementary school counselor, physical education leader, volleyball coach, and tutor. That's 40 words. That's the max.
Mm.
It's interesting. She's gotten in everywhere she's applied. She applied to nursing programs, physician assistance programs, like a 4-year plus graduate program and pre-med programs. And out of the 11 colleges that she got admitted to, she got merit scholarships at 9 out of 11 schools. And this is a young woman who said in the mock interview, and this is one of the things in my book, I say, never lead with your limitations.
Mm.
And I say that as a woman who has at times led with my limitation or my weakness. But during the mock interview, she said, I'm not the best student. I'm not, in the top 10% of my class. My test scores are not high. And I say, okay, those are your limitations. You never have to share them again.
Yeah.
Lead with your strengths. And that's a big part of self-awareness, the soundbite, and the whole application process. Because if you ever lead with a weakness or a limitation, the only thing the person on the receiving end will remember is that limitation or that weakness that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So she led with her strengths, and it worked wonders.
Mm. That's a good reminder. And both of those led me to think about like, oh, I want to read their application, right? I want to know more about them. So in some ways, I feel like your soundbite is it's quick, but it should lead the person to say, I want to ask that student more questions. I want to know more about what that means. And like you said, with the middle blocker, it can kind of, expand to many different things that she has done. So that is a good way to kind of think of that when we coach our students. So in just a second, we're going to transition. We've got a couple of questions from our audience. So I want to turn to a few of those, but as we talked about before, you and I both do a lot of mock interviews with students and prepare students for kind of thinking about how do you best talk to, an adult. And remember that in the college admission process, we're humans, right? Like when we worked in the admission process, we are the humans behind the process. And so I always say to my students, don't be worried, don't be nervous. They just want to have a conversation with you, just like we've been doing here today. So I just want to have you finish these couple prompts and almost my mock interview of you that you can just give me a quick and dirty here at the end, and then we'll turn to these couple of great questions. So you can finish the prompt of, I love working with high school students because.
Because I needed and wanted someone like me when I was a high school student to recognize things in me and I really needed a cheerleader. So I like to be the cheerleader for all those high school students. And I also say a little bit in jest that I relate much better to high school students than adults, that I just love. It's more about just, I love that age range, that everything is in front of them, even if they feel like they can't get out of their own way. I come in and feel like I can put them in the right direction and they're on their own way. I just find that age range, it's so critical. And I can get any high school student to open up to me. And it's interesting, even if the parent asks the same question, sometimes they won't get the same back, but we know that sometimes as college counselors, we play such a special role. Now, Laura, I'm going to have to get you to ask those questions to my kids when they go through the process.
Right, we'll trade.
We'll trade. But they open up. If you just engage and give them the floor, they will open up in ways that will surprise you.
I agree. The next one, if I could change one thing in the college admission process, it would be.
Oh, it would have to be the secrecy about the admissions process. And, I'm all about transparency, because if students and parents understand the process and understand the competitiveness, then they can make better choices about where they visit colleges and what colleges end up on the college list. It's so hard to get just basic data from these colleges. Like, what is your overall acceptance rate? What is the acceptance rate in early decision versus early action versus regular? I really constantly write and speak about transparency in the admissions process, because that is how students and parents can get through this journey of applying to college.
Mhm. Yeah, we just had a case studies, right, with our junior class. It's a good example of having admission people come and talk to our families, just like you're saying, and being transparent to say, we're not hiding, what's behind this curtain, like Oz behind the curtain. We want you to know what we're looking for. But it is those priorities that you don't know at the end of the day, right? So when you're applying as a student, you put out what you can and the best that you can and let the rest, kind of fall, and you'll land usually in the right place, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Okay, one more. I'd like to do 3 or 4 more, but with the couple of questions we have, we'll just do this last one. I think the pandemic has changed college admission in the following way.
I think it's forced colleges to decide what's really important,
Mhm,
because as we saw, most colleges go test optional this year. Many of those colleges saw, a huge increase in applications
mhm,
and incredible diversity of all kinds, racial, geographic, socioeconomic. So they have to decide, is that what we want? Or are those objective test scores what we want? And I think we're hearing of a lot of colleges extending their test optional policy for next year, even though test sites are opening up. So I think
mhm.
it is going to force colleges to really look at what is important in the admissions process.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So we've got a couple questions in the Q&A, and one is from a counselor in New Jersey who says that they consistently share with their students that college fit over college name, which we can both attest to that, and discuss often the many characteristics of fit. But unfortunately, many of her families or his families still tend to reach for very selective colleges and have unrealistic expectations. So how do
Yeah.
you best say to families the importance of a balanced list?
Yeah. So I tell families, if you're going to go visit Harvard in the Boston area, that is a reach school for every single student. But you better be visiting a target college for you and a likely college. For every reach college that you visit, you also have to do just as much work in learning about all types of schools so that your list is balanced. What I find is, and I'm sure you see this, Laura, they only want to go to the reach college on their college list. And so if they don't get into that reach college or that highly selective college, they feel like they don't want to go to any college that admitted them. But the fact is, they just haven't invested enough time in learning about those other colleges on their list.
Mhm.
And so if they invest the time, visit those other schools, whether in person or virtually, spend time on the website, they will be much more knowledgeable about those other options out there.
Mhm.
But in the end, going to an Ivy League school, doesn't, set your path and, gold and open up every single opportunity. It really does come down to the student and
Mhm.
what they take advantage of while they're in college. And so let those students and parents follow the Ivy League or the reputation. In the end, the students that know what is the right fit for them,
Mhm.
they end up being the most successful.
Yeah. Another question here is, do you interview students who are part of Application Nation to identify their soundbite?
Yeah, so that mock interview is the most popular thing I offer because I'm getting them ready for a real college interview. But in the end, as I say, I can talk to a student for an hour. I feel lucky, right? I can come away with a soundbite. I do make them start a draft and then I finish or edit the rest of it, especially if they're struggling. And then
Mhm.
we also come up with usually 3, 4, 5, 6 essay topics in that mock interview, because I'm usually asking the questions that I know will lead to them opening up, not
Mhm.
just about the things that are on their resume, but the things that are much more intriguing to people like you and me, Laura, as
Mhm.
former admissions officers, those things that we don't always talk about, but are part of our being and our everyday life. A lot
Yeah.
of times those are rich with essay topics.
Mhm.
So I get a great soundbite from the mock interview if they want to do it that way, or they can do it on the discussion board and we edit it together on the
Mhm.
discussion board. So they can do it on the discussion board or privately with me through our one-on-one session.
Great. So we're getting a little bit of the warning that we're down to the wire here, which I knew we would be. And I said this to you when I first, talked with you last week, that we could talk for hours, I think. It's such an interesting topic. It's so timely, right, for everything that's happening in our world and around us, to encourage our students to think about who they are as people and where they're headed. So I wish we had more time. But I do want to just remind people who are on the call that you can click the buy a book button. You can certainly log into Application Nation if you want to continue working with Sara and seeing the resources she has out there for students. If you happen to be one of my families at Key School, don't worry, I'm already on her list. And so I've already downloaded some of her references and resources. And that's actually a great just reminder, right, that we're all here to work together to help students. So whether you're working on your side, Sara, or on my side of the desk, or a college admissions counselor or a parent, that we're all here to work with and help our students find the right place. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us today, Sara. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Laura. It was wonderful to be here. I really appreciate it.
It was. And good luck to our juniors, parents out there of juniors who might be just starting this process. And if you have younger students, the force be with you, right? It's a long journey, but it will work out. So take care, everyone. And thank you so much for being with us today at the book festival.
Thank you.